All the electrical equipment is going off. Since it is Women in Horror Month, we are going to talk about some female vampires. We're going to compare and contrast a couple different new movies, a couple different old movies, and see how they hold up. We're going to do things a little bit differently here in this video. I'm going to talk about how I feel about something and then go back and look at what I've written at horroraddicts.net to see if sometimes our opinions change, sometimes movies just don't last. It happens. So firstly, of course, I wanted to start out with Underworld and Underworld Evolution, and I think the next one's Underworld Rise of the Lycans, and I have a new one in my queue called Underworld Awakenings that I haven't watched yet. Now, rather than reviewing a film and then talking about it in Frightening Flicks like I normally do, I decided not to go through a rewatch for these because I wanted to talk more about the impressions that the Underworld films kind of left on horror movies, women in horror at the time, action movies, vampire movies. I think that's what we kind of remember most about these movies now. I remember really liking them at the time. There's a lot of cool things in them. I think I remember liking Underworld Evolution, the second one, better than the first one, but I don't really remember anything very specific about these movies. I mean, everybody remembers Kate Beckinsale wearing like tight black things and looking like a totally hot vampire because she is. And I remember there being a lot of action horror. This was the early aughts, early 2000s, I think, where after this for a very long time, everything had to be action horror. You couldn't have anything that was a slow, simmering kind of horror movie. Now we're just getting back to that, only maybe in the last 5 years or so, where it's okay to say here's elevated horror or dramatic horror and slow burn horror. It's been there all along. Horror audiences know what to look for. But there was just a phase there where every movie had to have some kind of like panoramic pause where the camera had to spin around for a full roar revealing monster where we were supposed to stop in slow motion and all of the CGI and the monster, and then it would, cut super fast back into all the action. It's like, that's kind of what I remember about these movies. Yeah, they were fun. Yeah, Kate Beckinsale, oh, it was vampires versus werewolves. That's what made it different. I remember being confused at the time why she was kind of interested in, like, the lead singer from Creed. But then I realized that wasn't the same guy that was in the movie. But I feel like these movies maybe, yeah, they're fun for a late night horror movie watch, but I don't think that they've held up very well. Let me go back and look at what I actually wrote then for my review. So I have them drawn up here. Underworld and Underworld Evolution. I actually wrote a twofold review together. Slick, Sexy, Popular Underworlds. That was what I called the title, and this was back in 2009. Wow. I've long held the theory that whenever Hollywood needs bite at the box office, it raises one of the film's longest staples, vampires. That is still definitely true. Hollywood always chirps out vampires when they need something cool and fast and slick and fancy. Death dealers, immortals, hybrid vampires, original immortal vampires. I remember there is one, is it the third or fourth, where there is no Kate Beckinsale and it's in the past and it's all about the werewolf history where you get all the backstory. I think when you can look at the whole series and maybe get everything in chronological order and find out what's happening, it has a nice story to it, but I still feel like the story always took a backseat to the action. And action horror can be good, it can be great. And it's kind of ironic because around the same time was 300 as well, and I still feel like a lot of movies are still trying to look like 300. So it definitely made its mark. They're still entertaining, but you get what you expect in a turn-of-the-century action horror vampire movie. And for as badass as Kate Beckinsale is, as Celine is, how there's such unique kind of character history and development there, it all still ends up hinging on a romance. So, way to make it all, yes, girl power, she can kick ass, she's got these awesome guns with these ultraviolet or silver nitrate bullets. The vampire would not have the silver nitrate bullets. sorry. No, wait, see? I just remember there being really cool guns for each. That one was like ultraviolet light for vampires, one was silver nitrate for the werewolves. And it's like there's all these cool action shots and all the really cool like oh, okay, now we have to watch like the spin and like the shooting through the floor kind of things. Like all these cool, oh, she's so badass and she can leap off the buildings and she can pose with her black cool leather jacket, you know, blowing in the wind against the silhouetted moonlit sky. You know, all that is so awesome and so cool, but it still has to be about making sure she's got a boyfriend at the end of the day. Even if it's, you know, oh, we're going to be Montagues and Capulets and make it a werewolf boyfriend. You know, but still, it's like, why couldn't she just be her own badass chick? Why did it have to have, like, romance? You know? Upon seeing Underworld for the first time, I quite enjoyed it. Yes, it puts effects over drama, but it's a new notch in the vampire film's lore. Some people who don't like the same old vamps, who I don't know why, I actually wrote that. It used to be a little touch and go when confessing to liking vampires and werewolves, but the slick, sexy, action-packed Underworld franchise has made leather-clad vampires and lonely lycans fun for the masses. You know, I hate to be one of those people who kind of talks about, like, genre and fandom and say, you know, I liked it before it got famous. It was better then. You know, now everybody's taken it over and ruined it. And it's kind of funny because that's kind of what Underworld did. You know, vampires were not popular at the time. I mean, you really had Anne Rice and Buffy, and well, Buffy is a whole other world. In fiction, you kind of had the Laura K. Hamilton novels were coming around in the 90s as well. That's when paranormal romance really kind of developed. So vampires were very much of a niche kind of audience at the time. But then Underworld exploded it into, hey, guys can go watch this movie, and it can be cool, and there can be a lot of box office, because look, it's so badass, there's so many special effects, and the chick is hot. And Underworld still has all that. And I guess that's fine, but it's not fine for everybody. We went so far to that extreme of everything has to be such action horror, and everything has to be so cool, and in your face, and up a minute and all the time, that, you know, we forgot about, you know, what about all the other kinds of horror, right? So, in comparison, I wanted to go way back and talk about The Vampire Lovers. Now, this is an old Hammer film starring Ingrid Pitt and Peter Cushing. It's based on the Carmilla novel that came out before Bram Stoker's Dracula, actually. And this is, to me, as big a female vampire movie as you can get. And I remember watching this and my husband seeing it for the first time and saying, this doesn't seem like your kind of movie. And I said, why? Because it's like half-naked chicks and lesbian vampires? It's so? So what? It's a great story. And for being, what year was this movie made? 1970 is when The Vampire Lovers was made. For it being a film made in 1970, it still looks really great. It's not dated at all, as opposed to Underworld, where you can definitely see the CGI changes and the style for the time. It is of its time. The Vampire Lovers is very timeless. Now, it is a period piece, but it does not look dated. I mean, there's a few 70s kind of bouffant, maybe kind of hairstyles that don't match some of the Regency or turn of the 19th century looks in the film. But the 70s styles at the same time have that kind of Regency Empire waist kind of style, and everything really, really looks beautiful. These ladies are so beautiful. And Ingrid Pitt was a fascinating woman, and she's written a lot of horror material that you could actually go read some of her biography. She had such a tormented kind of intriguing life before she even got to being a Hammer superstar. And it's ironic because in vampires, for as much as we just had, ooh, we're going to have a bad female badass chick vampire, there's always been, we seem to always circle back to the men being, you know, kind of brooding, or today, you know, emo and sparkly, unfortunately, you know, where things like having Barnabas Collins be a sympathetic vampire, or having all the kind of emotional kind of ups and downs and things like Interview with a Vampire were really unheard of at the time. It was always vampires are the bad guys at this time. So here you have a story that's about a female vampire. She is a predator. She is a killer. She knows she's going to kill who she loves. And that upsets her. And there are, okay, some weird kind of tongue-in-cheek scenes with, you know, the chicks changing their clothes and running around each other in the bath, all kind of nice and jiggly and bouncing on the bed, and the victim having a dream that, you know, there was a big cat laying on top of her and, you know, tickling her or taking her breath away. Kind of, all kind of innuendo that Hammer was really pushing the envelope at the time, let's remember. Maybe a few years later, like Dracula AD 1972, you know, you have Christopher Lee's got, you know, the chicks in chains with, you know, their shirts ripped out and he can bite anywhere he pleases. But 1970 maybe was still, this was still kind of shocking. And there's all kinds of jealousy and conflicts as, you know, one victim bites and another victim bites and another woman wants in on it, and of course there's male manipulations. And it's quite intriguing because it's just a really great story that there is this kind of, I don't want to say abusive, but it's definitely pain and predatory. Where this is what we find so funny about when we've got vampires like, you know, why would 200- and 300-year-old vampires always want to hang around these high school chicks? It makes no sense. You know, we kind of tend to forget that these aren't, you know, really dreamy things, that these are predators, which when you read the original Dracula, you do get that sense of this is pain and death and undead and terrible things are going to happen when you become Dracula's bride. So, yeah, Carmilla knows this, but, and this also becomes part of the Karnstein trilogy, and Hammer really kind of gets into making more of these in a loose kind of connected way, but she knows she's going to cause pain. She knows that she's going to kill what she loves and what she finds so beautiful and so innocent and pure. That's exactly why she's attracted to it, but that's exactly what she's going to ruin by loving this person and killing them and making her a vampire with them forever. So you could, on the surface, say that this movie is just a lot of, you know, hammer, blood, and chopped heads and TNA, and that's all there is to it. But there's so much more. There's just a layer of period piece kind of subtlety and nuance, and there's some really intriguing performances, and there's some different layered roles for the women. You know, we have the villain who's conflicted and misunderstood. We have, you know, innocent victim ingenues, but then we have different kind of jealous maids and governesses. So there's not just one woman who's being badass, or there's not just, you know, one woman who's being the double-crossing kind of chick, or siding with the other people, or the chick who's there to look cool. These women have roles to do, and Peter Cushing is actually kind of has a more minor part in the film. He's kind of there in the beginning. He comes and goes at the end, you know, when, you know, all the swords and head choppings and things need to come out, of course, because the vampire has to be done in, whether, you know, she didn't mean to kill anybody, or whether she actually really hurts the one she loves and feels bad about it, you know, she's not going to win. That's no spoiler alert to say. These are vampire movies. So let me see what I wrote after talking about the Vampire Lovers for a really long time, right? Let me see what I wrote about it. Now, I wrote about the Vampire Lovers for horroraddicts.net. I will do all the different links to the things that I've spoken about as well that I've written about. If they're not at horroraddicts.net, then they're at my blog, I Think They're Fire Review. I've done different vampire series for each website, and let me see. My Underworld review was actually in 2009, and I started at Horror Addicts in 2012. So this Vampire Lovers review was 2011. Okay. Kinky. Hammer's kinky 1970 adaptation of Carmilla. The Vampire Lovers all but has it all. I guess that pretty much says it. It doesn't look dated one bit, but it's still very well paced and keeps up the entertainment throughout. Fog, castle moods, early 19th century frocks and wispy nightgowns, sparkling candelabras and jewelry. You know I had to notice things like this, right? Come on. It sets all the tone for plenty of blood, fangs, bites, and lots of boobs. I really love the Vampire Lovers. If you asked me to choose what was my favorite female vampire movie, I would say the Vampire Lovers. Even if you only really like modern horror movies, I would definitely say give this one a chance. So, would love to hear what you have to say. I'm so glad to hear so many different diverse voices. I am only one small person at Frightening Flicks, and I know that I'm pale. I have to continually adjust the white balance on my camera, so I am so glad to hear other people's voices. This is actually a little bit later, editing Kbatz. I'm looking at the footage, and my feline director bamboozled some of the audio, so I lost some of the footage that I was discussing. Okay, here's hoping that the cat does not bamboozle the microphone again. We all know that I'm technologically incompetent and cats think they are superior. But I just didn't want to end there. I did want to mention that I do like some modern movies that have some nice female characterizations for vampires. Byzantium is a great film. I know I'm going to bamboozle their names. Gemma Arterton and Saoirse Ronan, Johnny Lee Miller. There's an easy name. Case of the Damned is another lovely little vampire piece. And A Girl Walks Home at Night also. Just the title alone is a lovely kind of reversal trope. We tend to think the worst. Oh, you know, no, something bad is going to happen to a little girl walking home alone at night. It's going to be scary. The film has some great role reversals on that as well. I've actually discussed those pieces in the horroraddicts.net Horror Addicts Guide to Life. That book is actually still available on Amazon. On the blog, I actually talk about Vampire in Brooklyn and Vampires vs. the Bronx on the podcast. I'll include all the links for which I've discussed here in all the information. Some of the previous podcasts, some of the previous videos that I've talked about. I've had lots of conversations about Dracula and Dark Shadows. All the previous articles and reviews that we've done at horroraddicts.net. There's even more old school Twins of Evil, a lot of the French, Jean Rollin, Shiver of the Vampires, Daughters of Darkness. A lot of that classic, suave, sexy, old-fashioned vampire style. And, well, I can't say we don't bite.